Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 Reading Pals Annual Learning and Impact Gathering. We are so glad you are here with us as we celebrate these 14 years of the Reading Pals program and see so many of you here from communities all across Florida. If you've been with us before, you know the drill. We'll ask you right away to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from and who you're representing. As we move on here, I just want to say a couple of words about the children's movement. You know that we exist to advocate for the policies and investments that help children thrive in their first 5 years. We're working with the business community, with community leaders, with educators, with volunteers, with so many folks, and bringing them together to contribute to that change that we want to see. And Reading Pals is one of the most joyful examples of what it looks like to put early literacy into action. As so many of you are doing, it connects caring adults with young readers. It builds confidence. It reminds us and reminds children that reading is a moment of connection, imagination, and possibility. So thank you as you are all introducing yourselves. I'm going to ask for our team to pull up a poll because we want to know a little bit more about what role you bring to this moment today. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Michaela Buchanan, our Chief of Staff, who will share a little bit more about Reading Pals and our impact over the last year. And as I'm looking at this, I see volunteers, coordinators, teachers, folks who are interested in volunteering, and others who just care about early literacy and want to get involved. So we will share this with you in just a moment. You're very active participants. We're at about let's see, almost 65% of you have answered so far. We know some of you are probably in the car and won't be able to do this, but we'll give it just another minute here and we'll show you who's here. And Michaela, I will turn it over to you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Madeline. So it's so great to see everybody this afternoon. And before we do hear from our keynote, Kent Johnson, we just wanted to take a moment to remind you what you're part of. Reading Pals, as Madeline shared, it's not just a program. It's really a statewide community of people who believe that children deserve strong starts, caring adults, and joyful experiences with books. And so over the last year, Victoria, thanks. All 15 regional partners, those many of you representing them on the call across 23 counties. You were in over 200 locations, schools, community centers, and in 419 classrooms. Together, you were able to activate 1,622 volunteer mentors, many of which are serving in their second, third, all the way to their 14th year of the Reading Pals program. And they were matched with just over 2,700 students. And so those students ranged from VPK, our 4-year-olds, all the way to third grade, really helping instill that strong start that we know you guys are also passionate about. And of course, as Kent gets up here in just a minute, Reading Pals is not just the mentoring session for many of your programs. You're actually sending books home, right? You are extending that love of literacy into the homes, into the bedrooms of children where they're reading with their caregivers every single day. And so more than 21,000 books were distributed. And we just think that that's so special to build those home libraries for young children who may not have the means to buy them on their own. And when we think about the impact, because outputs are one thing. It's really special to see the number of volunteers, the number of students, the number of books sent home, but the behavior changed, really the outcome that we're after, the change in a student's life because of you, because of the work that you do every single day. We see children going from struggling readers, scoring at some of the lowest levels in their school, to achieving the highest score on their state assessment in their whole class. Over time, we see young children who many of you know struggle struggle to identify capital letters versus lowercase. They may not be able to write their name. Certainly, you learn so much more about them when you're spending that quality one-on-one time with them every single week. But it's making a difference for them. They are starting to pick up the alphabet. They're starting to remember, and they're able to apply that learning. And it just builds such a strong foundation for them that we know will carry forward no matter what they go on to do. And so we're just so thankful for the work that you make possible. The movement could not do this work without you. You are the backbone of all of this. And so we just want to thank you for being here today. And I want to turn it over back to Madeleine so she can introduce our keynote, who hopefully will give you some more inspiring words now that you've seen just a little taste of the impact you helped make this year.
Thank you so much, Michaela. So it is a great honor to introduce Kent Johnson, the CEO of Highlights. I'll tell you just a few things about him. First of all, you won't be surprised in this group of reading pals that so loves books. So does Kent. Has read all the Harry Potter books and loved them. Earlier in life, it was all about rhyming, and he loved Dr. Seuss. I'd say that, like many of us, Kent grew up with Highlights magazine in the home, but unlike any of us, he also grew up knowing that it was his great-grandparents who started this. So Kent Johnson is the great-grandson of Gary and Caroline Myers, who founded the magazine. They were experts and real believers in the power of childhood. They believed that children are the most important people in the world. They believed that fun has a purpose. And they also believed that those really first years of life are the critical moment for social development, emotional development, cognitive development, and that they deserved special attention. So you see why there's overlap between the work that we're doing here at the movement and with Reading Pals and with Kent and his work. I'll say one other thing, that Kent has a PhD in physics, and he was working in a biotech startup when he was pulled into the family business back in 2002, joining the board of directors. And it was a moment and surprise when he came in as CEO in 2005, and the company has changed so much in these years. So Kent, will welcome you on screen. Kent is here not for a sales pitch, but to join us in this shared mission of helping more children fall in love with reading and helping more adults see the power they have to make a difference. So one last thing, Kent, before I turn it over to you, there is a Q&A button in here. We'll only have a couple of minutes for questions, but if you've got something burning for Kent, put it in there. And over to you.
Well, thank you, Madeline. I do believe deeply in my core that children are the world's most important people, and I'm was incredibly honored and grateful that you invited me to talk to this group. And as Michaela went through the slides talking about the scale of impact in numbers, but then some of the qualitative, it just reminded me of how important it is to celebrate Reading Pals and celebrate everyone on the call and everyone who participates. We can go to the next slide. You know, I am a publisher. I work at Highlights, but I have understood deeply in my core that materials we make for children, the books themselves, they're not the most important thing. The most important thing for changing behaviors and changing outcomes is the human relationships that are formed with children, whether it's a teacher in a classroom, a parent, friends, their community. But what you all are doing, the volunteers, or if you're on this call considering being a volunteer, giving that time of yourself to a child for that shared reading, that mentoring, that conversation, that really matters. And for some children, having a mentor, the concrete demonstration of someone who really cares and shows up for them can make all the difference. And let's be honest, no matter where a kid is, even for us as adults, the idea that someone shows up and invests in us can be life-changing. So I want to just start by saying my job here, my goal is to celebrate you and to appreciate you. You choose to show up for children in moments that matter. And I believe and hope that has great impact on those children going forward. And let me tell you a little bit where some of our beliefs come from. Let's go to the next slide. I'll tell you a little bit about my great-grandparents. So Highlights for Children. So we were founded in 1946. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our birth, our origin story, but that means we just got to celebrate our 80-year legacy, our 80th year birthday. And I was able to do that this past weekend with the owners of the company, my cousins. Like, we are a family-owned business. We got to sing happy birthday, have a cake. And how we're owned is really not important to you. But what I will say is, along the history of our company, my predecessors, the founders, decided we needed to stay family-owned and independent so that we could stay mission-driven, purpose-driven, and so that we could always act as a company dedicated to children and also to the adults who care for, the adults who love children. So I'll tell you a little bit about our philosophy before I get into the history. We believe deeply that children are the world's most important people. When I walked into the office today, I see that written in huge letters on the wall of our lobby. It's written on my business card. We have a detailed set of beliefs about childhood being a short, sweet season, about what we want children to believe. These beliefs and philosophy around children motivate everything we do. And it's one of the reasons I just love being on the call with you all today. So let me tell you a little bit about my great-grandparents and the journey they went on to start Highlights. So they were a husband and wife team, equal partners throughout all things. They had long careers before they even thought about starting a company. So my great-grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse. My great-grandfather would have been thought as an educational psychologist. So the two of them traveled the country, talked to parents. If there were webinars, they would have been on webinars like this. So they were very interested in a movement in the 20s and 30s around how parenting was changing and evolving based on the growing understanding of child development. My great-grandfather had a syndicated radio show around parenting and a newspaper column. So they were reaching, both lasted for decades. They were reaching people, adults across the country, developing their philosophy and sharing positive parenting messages with people. Later in their careers, they realized had the thought that we would like to spend our time left, the time we have available, to create things that directly impact kids. And that's what led them to start this company. So at the age of 59 and 61, they decided to throw everything. They pushed all their chips in to start Highlights for Children. And it really, for them, was similar to the step you all have taken to say, we want to move from being adults who think about and support and care about children to doing something that would be part of facilitating a parent-child interaction. And actually, I want to share a piece about my great-grandfather that I don't usually include in the company history. So my great-grandfather spent a number of years in individual tutoring and mentoring for a child who lived near him. In hindsight, that child was probably dyslexic, was struggling with reading, and my great-grandfather worked with him every week for multiple years. And I do believe deeply that his experiences with an individual child, on top of all of his academic learning, his research, his publishing, influenced him and taught him and all of us how important that direct mentoring. So in a way, if you are a volunteer who is with a kid, I want you just to think you're part of this continuum that is part of the founding story, part of the founding way Highlights came into existence. So let me see if there's, so so we started in 1946. I'm not going to do any advertising, any sale, but we started as a magazine. Broadly, we think of ourselves as a company in all the things we do, whether it's in classrooms, in early learning settings, in consumer settings. Our goal is to help children become their best selves. So we're a purpose-driven company. And let's go now to the next slide. And I just want to hit this point hard. For those of you who are mentors, you are doing exactly what our founders believed was so important and so powerful. Michaela said it, the numbers are incredible, but what we're about, what you're about, is not about the program, the number of books, the number of volunteers. It's about the transformational impact of a caring adult who shows up for a child. And we'll talk more a little bit about that. But I want to talk first about reading and the power of a love of reading. Let's go to the next slide. So it highlights we do care deeply about children acquiring literacy skills. Just as in Florida, we want all of those kiddos to pass their assessments, to develop kindergarten readiness, to pass the third grade reading spectrum. We all on this call, all of us who care about children, care deeply about literacy skills. And what you're doing in this program does have a direct impact on literacy skills. But it highlights, particularly in the magazine, but in our company, we talk about the distinction between helping children learn to read and the goal of helping children love to read. And what the power of children loving to read, learning to love reading, what it means for them in their trajectory through school, but beyond school into life is so, so critical. So I want to go through what we call our 4 C's and just talk a little bit about the love of reading and what it can do for children in their development. And the first C is being curious. And this is where when we have a book, we can travel to a new land, to a different set of ideas. So a good book can fill that child with wonder, can show that child things that they're not experiencing in their day-to-day life. And when that good book is spurring that curiosity, and someone who's a mentor, a teacher, a parent can be involved in a conversation about that book, we can fuel that curiosity. So as I think of you all, or I think of myself reading to my own children, it's not just reading the words on the page. It's the conversation. It's the questions that come from the child. It's the imagination a child brings to that book. And it also can be fueled by the open-ended questions that an adult poses that create that dialogue. So I hope sometimes your mentoring sessions feel less like reading a book to a child and more the conversation around it. So let's talk a little bit about creativity. To be successful in our world, in our life, to sort of have every child be able to achieve with their abilities, we've got to develop our creativity. And indeed, we know children are incredibly creative, and a child who grows up reading lets that creativity stretch out into the world, not just to where they are. So we talk about in books the idea that books for children can provide windows and mirrors. So when children can see themselves in the books, they identify, they grow their love of reading, and when they see others, we can develop the creativity. I want to now turn to confidence. So, many of us are involved in literacy, being from pre-literacy, early childhood. I don't know all the ages of the kids you're interacting with, but the incredible power, and I hope you get to see some of it as you mentor a child through the year, of a child who is acquiring a skill of literacy, who is getting a little bit better every week, who is learning to decode, learning to understand. A child developing that reading skill and learning ways to figure out from the books the content, the ideas, and the conversations they can have with you is developing their confidence. So building that confidence is so critical to continuing that literacy journey beyond the mentoring sessions, beyond the classroom, out into the world. And last, and I won't say it's most important, but on some days I do feel it's most important, caring, being a compassionate individual, having empathy. Books give us the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to look at situations from different perspectives. The research shows that reading fiction, reading great children's books, leads to the kind of brain development that allows a higher level of social, emotional understanding and empathy for other humans. And if there's one thing I believe as deeply as children being the most important world, is that we need more kindness in our communities, kindness in our classroom, kindness in our society, and building a love of reading can build towards kindness. Let's go to the next slide. I want to reflect on these. And, what I've just talked about is the difference between learning to read and a love of reading. And the love of reading leading to not just lifelong learning and success and all the things we hope for, but for our children, but to these 4 C's. And I just want to tell you how I normally introduce our company. So I like to say that Highlights for Children exists to try to help build a more optimistic an empathetic world where all children can become their best selves. And in our context, what we want for children to become their best selves, it's a whole child concept. We want children to become curious, creative, confident, and caring. So you can see the direct connection to why we exist as a company, why I believe Reading Pals exists as a program around literacy and a love of reading, and what a love of reading and your relationships with the children can have in around those 4 C's, a whole child kind of development. Let's go to the next slide. I also think we're working towards that optimistic and empathetic world, but it's truly built by people who show up for children. You are those people. And I just want to say, with the intense humility that I get to speak to you, is that my great-grandparents who started Highlights spent their careers focused on trying to reach the adults around children because they believed deeply in their core that was the best way to help a child on their journey. And all of you on this call, all of the others who might see this later, you're proof and a validation of everything our company stands for and exists. So I'm deeply appreciative to be here. Actually, well, we can go to the next slide. I want to add one other thing that is cool from a Highlights perspective that I'll share. You're making this incredible impact, whether you're an early childhood educator, whether you're running the program, whether you're in as a mentor. It can be very difficult to have an appreciation of the magnitude of the impact you might be having in the moment. One of the really cool things at Highlights is that children have sent us letters for years, and we write back to them. So in the magazine, through the magazine, we end up having a relationship with kids. And all of us at Highlights are incredibly blessed because sometimes someone will write us a letter as an adult, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, even more after they had this relationship with Highlights. And they'll tell us how important it was for them in their development as a child. We know when we receive a letter that they're thanking us and acknowledging something that happened with the employees 20 or 30 years ago. I imagine for teachers, if you've served a long time, you sometimes get students coming back to thank and acknowledge the transformative power of that relationship. What I want to say to all of you who are mentors, you have to have confidence and faith that kind of interaction, that in the future, those kids will look back and you have no idea, but this mentoring relationship might be transformative. And just believe that letter from that child 30 years from now coming back to you, try to feel that appreciation, because it does take time and we don't always get to have that connectivity over the decades. So I want to close. I sincerely believe in you, believe in the work. I want to close with a quick ask. If you are a provider who supports these programs, I know you have a ton to do. Please lean in. These are hugely important programs, the Reading Pals, and I know you have so much on your plate. And lastly, if you're a volunteer, please volunteer again. Please share your positive experience. I would love to see Reading Pals in Florida have too many volunteers. Share how powerful this is. Bring other people into Reading Pals, because there's so many children and they all deserve a caring adult to spend time with them. Thank you very much. It's been a huge honor to speak with you today. Back to you, Madeline.
Thank you so much, Ken. So we've got time for a few questions, and I want to invite the audience again. If you've got one, just put it in the Q&A function here on Zoom. But Ken, the first thing I wanted to ask you is, we were talking about this the other day. You've got a PhD in physics, and I said, how do you bring this to the work? And when I saw your 4 C's and I see curious, I'm sort of feeling the beginnings of that. But can you talk more about your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost made a joke at the beginning. I was like, I promise there will be no physics in this keynote. I do think my background in science helps me being a CEO, and I think it is the curiosity. It's not the equations or the math. And I think that studying physics or whatever your background is, if it gives you an optimism that we can find solutions if it gives you a tenacity to keep saying there has to be a better way, there has to be a better way. So there's so many educators on this call. We know there's so many challenges as we try to make an impact on kids. And I do look at both our company and maybe even our society and how we think about child development. It's a series of puzzles. It's a series of, and it does take all of us. So all of us face challenges in our lives. And if you're working to try to benefit children, there certainly are challenges. And so you have to bring a faith that that your impact will matter, because you may not get to see it as that child grows. So I think there's something about physics having faith, but also just optimism and relentlessness. And I was also a puzzle kid. Like I loved puzzles, and I think that pushed me towards science. And but I also think my main piece, Madeline, is less about physics. It's just you have to be passionate about your purpose and your impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you're talking, I'm hearing sort of the elements of early STEM that
Yeah.
you talked about, the open-ended questions. You talked about just having confidence that your question matters. And I love what you said earlier about how, when our Reading Pals mentors are with kids, it's not about getting through every word on the page. It's about what's that conversation you have around it. And in a way, perhaps that relates to the question we have in the chat here. How do you
Yeah.
get a reluctant reader to read? I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not a reading expert, and I do. And if you're thinking in a mentoring situation and a episodic, the importance of oral language shouldn't be underestimated. So just the ability to read to a reluctant reader, to have a conversation. So I think force never works. You can't punish. You have to kind of entice. And find ways. So I think it's through the curiosity. The other thing about reluctant readers, we hear a lot talking to librarians and teachers, is the importance of taking the time to get to know that reluctant reader. So you're much more likely to have success with a reluctant reader if you can find materials or topics that relate to their interests. And I know there are reluctant readers. We try to say like not yet engaged readers, like and how do we I think of our High Five magazine for preschoolers. We don't say pre-readers, emerging, people who
Mm,
are coming along as readers. And you might have readers, and we've learned so much since the start of the company. We've learned so much about dyslexia and the continuum. We created text pretty recently, so there is a distribution of how kids are wired around reading.
yeah.
So there might be real reasons that someone is struggling with reading, and you want to have trained educators and professionals involved. That's why the science of reading is so important. But I think if you are the one thing I would say, if you are a mentor with a child reading and they're not engaged in reading themselves, have that conversation, have the oral language, just find a way to make sure they understand you're there as a caring adult to engage with them.
Yeah, that's great. I thank you for the intentionality and demonstrating your optimism when you talk about these not yet engaged readers.
Yeah.
And thank you also for talking about the importance of oral language. I think about our work with the 0 to 5 years is before you really developmentally expect children to be able to read. And language is the foundation of literacy. Vocabulary is part of the equation. So I love that. Um, there's a question in the chat that I wonder if you can answer
Yeah.
about ways to encourage employers to allow their employees to volunteer during the workday. And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something you've got at Highlights, a policy on that, but if you have, like as a CEO, any thoughts on how do you encourage that volunteer time? Many of our volunteers do have companies that support them. We'd love to have more of that.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important, and I'll tell you. So one, people need to ask. Like people need to say to the companies, "We want this." At Highlights, particularly around kids, we give 2 days a year, I believe, in terms of times you can go volunteer. We encourage our groups when they're doing, like, let's say it's the HR team or the finance team, when they're having an offsite or a planning to include some kind of impact project together as team building. Often like in Columbus, we have a great Ronald McDonald House. So it's like very kid connected
Mm.
and health. So I think it can become, or we try to have our purpose around kids become of our part of our culture. But the thing I would say to CEOs and to others is what I've realized is we have a generational shift going on, and like maybe 20 years ago, it wasn't as common for people to say, I want to volunteer from work with my work skills. But we are seeing a work population where it's kind of expected that companies support that kind of community engagement.
Yeah.
I tend to think we're all part of the community. We all live here. We should give back to the community. Sometimes that's through money. But the best way to create community engagement, I think, as a CEO, is for people to actually show up and engage with others, helping the community. So I don't know the secret to convince every company, every HR department, every CEO, but I see it as a trend moving that direction. So if you have a company that's not encouraging that, I would start the conversation because the world's moving that way and we need it in our country.
Absolutely. I will say even in our organization, we didn't have a written policy on it till maybe last year. And it was talking to other leaders in the private sector
Yeah.
who helped us see that even as a nonprofit, we needed that for our team. So I hear you on that shift in conversation. We also have someone wondering what is one of your favorite things about working at Highlights?
I mean, I hope it's hard through video, but I hope my passions come through a little bit. The reason I left physics, left biotech to come here was the potential to try to have a positive impact on children. I mean, I had teachers and parents who cared about me and made a difference in my life. So the ability to impact kids is why I'm here. But if you said, what's my favorite thing? I get to work with incredible people. I get to work with humans who are just good humans who want to create good in the world. And they're so creative and kind. And, at the end of the day, we don't have money. We're just gone at some point. What are we going to think about? It's going to be about the people. So as a CEO, I am just incredibly blessed with the caliber and motivations and the humans I get to work with is by far the number one favorite thing.
That's beautiful. And then we also have a question about sort of your text on the science of reading and how children are wired. Like, how would you explain the science of reading to a peer totally outside this field?
Yeah, I mean, science of reading is getting a ton of publicity, and it can in the media get I don't know, I don't it's so narrow what we say. So I think of it as there's a very complex set of ideas that are well developed by a lot of scientific research of how children learn to read. And the science of reading is sort of shorthand for saying we should take the well-validated, scientifically proven ideas about how children learn to read and put them into practice in what we do with curriculum and teaching methodology. It often has a component of direct and explicit instruction. So that gets shorthanded in the media as phonics. Phonics is a small part of it, but it's understanding how the brain learns and being very deliberate about it without losing the love of reading, without losing vocabulary, without losing comprehension. So there's no one article or small soundbite that can capture it, but it's about we have really good people in this country and around the world who have understood how children learn to read. Let's use that knowledge to do the best job we can as adults to teach reading in organized settings.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm also thinking about the equation I often see of the
Yeah,
simple view of reading, of this, your decoding skills, what do you do with words that you see on the page? And then your vocabulary, your oral
yeah,
language knowledge, and how do those fit together? They multiply. One is multiplied by the other to get reading. And so if
right,
zero, anything multiplied by zero is zero. If you're missing either piece, it doesn't work.
right.
But the decoding is as important as the vocabulary.
I do think our discussion of science of reading might stress parents out. And if you're at home, particularly with young kids, read to them, talk with them back and forth in the relationship. You don't have to overthink it as a parent. The more children are exposed to language, to text, to reading, the better, and as early as possible.
Yes,
So I think it's for our educators. Parents shouldn't get wound up about the science of reading, in my opinion.
absolutely. Well, this has been so great. It is a pleasure to talk to you. The spirit of your work comes out so strongly in what you've shared and the way you talk about the history and the now. And so there are a bunch of comments in the chat of people talking about getting highlights or getting highlights for their kids. And, I remember when I was a kid, it was in the doctor's offices, it was in the
Yeah.
libraries before we finally got it at home. And so hearing about how those moments of joy are really intentionally curated and that spirit remains in the company so many years later. Really special to have you. And thank you for highlighting again that importance of these caring adults, so many of them here on Zoom with us today.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank you.
again, Kent.
Been an honor, Madeline.
A real pleasure. So I think I have a couple more orders of business before I turn it back to Michaela, and that is to celebrate our 2026 honorees, our Reading Pals Impact Awards. And so the first one goes to Big Brothers and Big Sisters of St. Lucie, Indian River, and Okeechobee counties. We had a chance when we gathered all of our program coordinators across our 22 counties to hand them the actual award. But Big Brothers Big Sisters had almost 300 children paired with mentors this year, and that is huge that they are able to sustain this level of impact. Welcome all of you who are here from Big Brothers Big Sisters. What leadership you have. Thank you for sharing the joy of reading and building the confidence of young readers. And our second Reading Pals Impact Award this year goes to United Way of Marion County. When we get together with our program leaders across the state, often one of the things we talk about is, well, how do you um, recruit, retain volunteers in the program? And for Marion County, they have the highest percentage of volunteers who come back year after year after year after year after year. And so we're recognizing that volunteer retention for United Way of Marion County. And thank you so much to you as well for sharing the joy of reading and building the confidence of young readers. Now, just we've got a few additional actions before we close, so let me turn it back over to Michaela. Celebration matters, but there's so much left.
Absolutely. And as we look forward, we do have a couple of simple asks. So first and foremost, Kent, kind of beat me to it here, but invite someone to become a reading pal. We do really want there to be more volunteers than we can even use. And so a friend, a neighbor, a person at work, we invite you to just share that link with them so that they too can enjoy the benefits of reading with a young child the way that you do from week to week. The second ask is to share your story. So we talked a lot about outcomes and the impact that Reading Pals all over the state are making in young children's lives. And we obviously could not do that if you didn't tell us your story. And so we want to share your story, we want to inspire other people to make a difference the way that you do. And so again, checking out that link anytime throughout the year. We love to spotlight it on social media, on our website. It makes a really big difference when we're talking about this across the state. And then third, but definitely not least, we have our All In pledge. You may have seen this come up across our different channels, but back in January, we launched All In for Early Learning, and we launched it with All In for Early Learning Day. And since then, we have been gathering folks who are signing our pledge, showcasing that early learning matters to Floridians, right? We're in an election year, and if we want early learning, early literacy to be a priority for our next legislators, our next governor, we really want to show up with as many signatures on that pledge as possible. We're shooting for 1,000. I know we're probably about a third of the way there, if not more, but Victoria could check me on that. So hopefully you'll find one of those ways to continue to engage with us. And of course, if you're not already on our newsletter, definitely check that out and follow us on our social media platforms. But we just want to thank you again for being with us, spending your lunchtime to tune in, hear from Kent, and we send you all on a great rest of your day. Hopefully you have a great rest of your week, and we're here if you need us. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.